though one can't help but be a little curious as to what exactly is underneath the bat loincloth, ladies, even gents. Do you dare take a gander with me? The newest addition to McFarlane coming out with more excuses to create another Batman figure is here in the form of the Page Puncher Fight the Frozen Batman, or as I like to call him, the Caveman Batman, because it's basically Batman if he was a caveman. Or frankly, if we're going to be a little bit more direct, the Bat Family, if they were back in the Stone Age. And it's kind of a very refreshing, albeit still very much an excuse to just come up with a variant of Batman, so to speak. But at least it's part of the Page Puncher's wave that includes the comic, the card, the base, an awful lot of value, only this time, sadly, it came in this bubble packaging that, frankly, I just really do not like. I understand it's supposed to be harkening back to the good old times of McFarlane back in like the late 90s or early 2000s when they were doing an awful lot of the sports stuff, the Spawn figures that they were kind of inducting at the very beginning of the McFarlane brand infancy, but I personally just never liked these style of packaging, not just for McFarlane, but for any brand, because it's just a goddamn chore to try to get through by cutting open the sides and making sure that you can either take it out from the front or from the back. Sometimes you risk cutting your hands and fingers on the plastic. It's just a whole task to get to this box. I'd rather take the cardboard ones that you could just open up the lid, slide everything out, and be done with it. And you still get the added bonus of being able to repackage the figures should you need to store them or move them around. And that really isn't so much the case with this packaging. But with the rant and the packaging itself finally out of the way, I want to tackle the new 7-inch version of the Caveman Batman here that at first kind of put me off. I mean, I'll be fully transparent. I did not pre-order this guy when it was first unveiled. When it was first revealed by McFarlane and pre-orders went live for various retailers, I really did hold off. Sure, I added it to my wish list and just pondered the idea of a Caveman Batman and whether or not this is a must-have in my collection, but being that I am going for a complete Batman assortment from McFarlane Toys, I thought, okay, fine. As we got closer to release time, I added it to the cart. Then I finally saw some more photos, some different dimensions, and even some blogger posts over at the McFarlane social media platforms, and thought to myself, you know, he's actually starting to warm up to me. Okay, alright. I can finally rest. Got the dad joke out of the way. Here's the figure, and you'll notice that yes, he is sporting the base, and that will be a very prominent point later in the review once we get to it. But for the time being, finally feeling him in hand and witnessing the actual sculpt work and detail and paint applications that was applied to a half-naked Batman here, god damn, this guy is chiseled, just like he was taken right out of the Stone Age. And I mean that both figuratively and literally. This is one of the buffest Batman I've ever seen in my life, but it kind of makes sense considering that he is supposed to be a Neanderthal version of the Caped Crusader, so he never skips a beat as far as retaining the aesthetic that you'd expect from Batman. From the spikes on the gauntlets, the ones that you see on the shins here in the form of boots with the protective covering, of course the cowl made out of skin that is probably lifted from one of those kind of primeval looking bats, you know, those very enlarged bats that have been said to have existed during the Ice Age. So it's cool that you could definitely see an awful lot of personality, an awful lot of aesthetic actually peering through this figure, and they managed to hone in an awful lot of those details that make the personality come much more alive. And frankly, it works. I would probably say my favorite one would have to be this entire chest area where, yeah, you could see that he is Batman. He's not susceptible to the sub-zero temperatures, but that's still going to allow some wiggle room for protective covering in the form of this fur mane around the shoulder area that is more than likely lifted from a mammoth with this piece of stone that is pretty much making up the bat symbol here in the front, and it all just looks very compelling. This entire here area, like I said, is personally my favorite. But then I think to myself, or maybe it's the gauntlets, because the actual construction work behind the spikes right here is actually really, really nice, as well as the nice little sculpt work around the utility belt, quote unquote. You have yet another bat symbol there in the middle, but the actual adornments that are happening here with the little fur edges, as well as the again, quote, stitching that's happening here between the fake pleather looking material as well as the ropes, the arrowheads, the little pieces of stone and buckles and straps and leather that definitely feel like they were just kind of makeshift for Caveman Batman. It actually really works in favor of the figure, though one can't help but be a little curious as to what exactly is underneath the bat loincloth, ladies, even gents. Do you dare take a gander with me? No, it looks like it's just another crotch piece. Yep, it's there. Frankly, I am disappointed. But while we're on the subject of very taboo areas of the overall sculpt, they also managed to get an awful lot of the skin detail and the musculature on the thighs. He doesn't look disproportionate, which has plagued certain McFarlanes in the past. It's funny because I saw how girthy and massively built the thighs were, and I thought that they were going to be a problem, only for then to make sure to nail the bulkiness of the shoulders and the chest, that it all just seems in line with each other. And again, it speaks to the personality of the character. This is caveman, survivalist Batman. He has to be bulked and yoked up in all areas of the body, not just the legs. So it's cool that the proportions actually make sense. The skin texture actually makes sense. This is, again, a very exposed Batman to the elements. So when things thaw out and it's the most scorching heat out there in the middle of the desert or the wasteland, he's obviously going to be retaining a tan. So you see an awful lot of the skin texture and actual paint applications applied to the very tan look, actually making sense for where you have the bits of the body exposed. And then again, another one of my favorite areas would have to be these boots, though I don't know what it is. Maybe this is just a personal peeve of mine. Your mileage may vary, but I never liked it when certain Batman figures, whether they're from McFarlane or not, always have like one gauntlet or one boot with an extra piece of protective covering, but then the other one doesn't. I never really understood that, but at least the quality of said covering is made very durably, and like I said, it actually kind of retains this paint application that looks like a faux kind of wood panel happening here on the knee, so that's pretty cool. And speaking of cool, I can't help but notice that cowl once more. Even though it's a little bit on the enlarged size compared to other cowls from prior Batman, again, it makes sense considering that it looks very well stitched together with a little bit of sewing happening here in the middle as well as the sides. The ears, even though they're a little bit on the rubbery and very bendy side, I mean, they kind of have to happen in order for safety hazards, but at least the actual sculpt work happening inside of the ear that actually makes it look legitimately like an ear, again, it adds to the personality and the lore, so to speak, that this Bruce did in fact go out there and hunt down a giant bat just so that he can take the trophy, dismember it, rip it apart, and use it as a skin for his cowl. It can't get any more badass than that. And I do appreciate the little bit of, like I said, very caveman, Neanderthal looking details happening with the jaw, especially with a little bit of scarring and weathering that's happening alongside the chin. He's not necessarily going to be all dolled up like he's been in the past, considering where this story takes place. Frankly, though, he is not perfect. That's when then we segue into the cape. Though I appreciate, again, the texture work, especially with the little stitches happening here in the middle to make it look like it's actually animal skin stringed together. And the actual quality of the paintwork and the surface detail with the texturing is really top notch. It's actually the design that I'm not a huge fan of once more. I don't like how it's super narrow here and then it just kind of coils off to the side. Again, not necessarily the worst thing imaginable and not exactly one of the worst capes that I've had to deal with in the McFarlane. There's definitely much worse ones out there, and it sometimes still boils down to preference, especially if you are a fan of the capes that are kind of in action like this. And there's been some exceptions where it actually worked in favor of the figure, but this one hasn't fully done the job. And the reason for that is because it also lends a little bit to the top heaviness of the figure itself. Even though the mane is not even as big or as hefty as it feels, I feel like it's working in conjunction with not just the fur mane here at the back with the little details of the hair puffing out, but also the massive amount of plastic that's happening alongside the shoulders and the chest that lends to the reason for why he's standing on the base. But that's not the only reason. To get to that reason, we need to go ahead and start working on the articulation. To start, of course, like always, we need to start with the head that is able to fully rotate 360, just mind the little edges of the skin cowl, so to speak. Wow, that That really sounds weird, doesn't it? Now that I think about it, it's actually damn near creepy. The skin cowl, just mind it a little bit when flushing the head from left to right when rotating it. Sadly, not much in the way of inclination towards the back to look up. I don't know if it's the girthiness of said cowl or the head joint, but he really can't look up all too well. He can barely kind of nudge its way about that far, but he strangely can look down a good amount before he gets in the way of the mane and the bat symbol. So you just have to futz with the joint a little bit to kind of shift it towards the front to be able to look down. But no matter how much I toyed with it, he really cannot look up. He is, however, able to slightly incline from left to right, as you can kind of see it right there. I just wish he could look up a little bit better, because then that would have completed the entire trifecta of axis that he can actually move about. So that would have been a little helpful for practically any McFarlane. Thankfully, though, because of the amount of freedom he's allowed with, well, his lack of clothes, quite frankly, he is able to move the arms a full 360 on that ball joint towards the top of the shoulder, as well as extend towards the sides very favorably. Though mind the bicep joint, because mine is a little on the bendy side, since this part of the arm is a little much more narrower than I would have liked it to be. Before we do move on to the bicep, though, he is able to slightly shrug the arms in place thanks to the butterfly motion that is slightly happening in the shoulders, just not as much as I would have liked. And I've already passed this with the hair dryer, so I don't know exactly what is causing it to limit itself a little bit, but you'll notice that the little washer piece in the middle is able to slightly allow the shoulder to shrug slightly left to right or forward and back, just a little so wild right there. But the biceps, nevertheless, can still rotate fully at the 360-degree angle horizontally, as well as the two joints at the elbow that are fully able to bend all the way up. And of course, the wrist is able to rotate 360 as well as bend inwards and outwards, thanks to the revamped version of those joints that are being used in much more contemporary McFarlanes. So I do appreciate that. I also appreciate the mobility in the torso that does have two joints, one in the mid-torso cut right underneath the wide-ass chest, as well as the latissimus dorsi, so to speak, right there in the back, that is able to nudge left to right, though because of the girthiness of that plastic piece, he can't really fully rotate 360. He's not as lean as your typical Batman, so he's gonna come in the way of himself, but at least much more rotation is allowed via the waist joint right above the belt, so you are able to nudge even further from left to right on that joint, as well as being able to extend towards the back pretty favorably, as you can see right there. It's actually pretty nice, as well as very solid crunch towards the front. So there's an awful lot of torso mobility happening with that piece. That's very well appreciated, very cool for a McFarlane. And then at the top of the legs, you are able to move the legs forward about that far, and then slightly towards the back about that far. Not much in the way of a crotch piece, because even though it is technically still there, it's much more lax than your usual ones due to, again, lack of clothing. So you are able to favor the articulation in various ways that way. And then the extension, of course, can be found right about right there. It's actually almost at the even 180-degree angle. Two joints at the knees that are fully able to bend all the way up like usual. And then we get to the major debate, the major topic at hand here as to why he's using the base. It's got to be those ankles. It's probably the Achilles heel of this figure. What's with me and the puns today? Man, but it's frankly not just a pun. It really is a major detriment to the figure. These ankles, despite utilizing the joint that I've been loving McFarlane to do for their figures recently, where you have a very flush piece of plastic that blends well with the ankle itself. It looks very natural. It's cut down the middle, so technically speaking, you still can bend the ankles downwards and upwards like so. A cool two or so ratcheted joints or points in either direction. Rotation is where it gets a little weird, because even though I've already passed this figure with the hairdryer a couple of times, there's only so much pivoting towards the inside and towards the outside before I start to get this strange resistance that feels like it's gonna break. It feels like maybe, just maybe, it was painted. I'm hoping that it's just my figure and not a widespread issue, but there's something kind of stuck feeling, if that makes any kind of sense, about the ankles here that are rather designed a little underwhelmingly. If you look at the design work of the ankles as well as the feet themselves versus the rest of the sculpting happening in the figure, it's actually kind of disappointing. Everything looks so badass, and yet it only looks like he just wrapped his feet in seaweed or something like that. I understand it's supposed to look resourceful for Caveman Batman, but at the same time, compared to everything else, it's kind of weak sauce. And on top of that, you add articulation that is utilizing a joint that I really love, and yet it feels like the paint might have gotten stuck, and because of that, I don't feel like there's proper 360 rotation whatsoever on either ankle, really. And like I said, I've already passed this figure with the hairdryer a couple of times. I don't know if maybe I'm gonna have to dip it in boiling water, but I can only pivot the ankle left to right at an angle as opposed to actually being able to rotate horizontally like some other McFarlanes have been able to do. And on top of that, there's something about the shaping on the soles of the feet that almost kind of make me feel like maybe I got the feet switched up, but then I look from the top and it doesn't really look that way. It looks like it's kind of the same on either side. I don't know if it's just me. You guys let me know. You guys are taking a look here at some close-ups. What do you guys think? Did I get the feet accidentally assembled in the opposite way, or this is exactly how they're supposed to be? They're just shaped kind of weird. If you guys own this figure, please let me know in the comments. But frankly, regardless of how the feet got assembled, they still have the toes that can fully bend almost all the way up like so. And it's actually through the bending of the toes that I can see that I technically got them assembled correctly, because underneath the toes, you can actually see the letter of the right piece. So you have the R here on the right foot and the L on the left foot. So I guess they're assembled correctly, but the way that they're sculpted almost makes me think otherwise. I don't know. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me here. All I know is that it's because of those feet that I just cannot stand for the life of me the figure on any kind of flat surface without the base. And I got some news for you guys. Even with the base, as you can kind of see a little bit there, he still fell a couple of times, even on top of the base. I don't know if it's the top heaviness from the cape, the hairy mane here on the shoulders and the back, but even on the base, he still has problems standing for prolonged periods of time, that if you are going to be displaying him outside of the, again, very controversial packaging, then I would say he's probably going to benefit from being up against the wall, or at least further back on your shelf, and making sure that there's no other figures, especially very priced figures, behind him, because he's going to be toppling them over. You can see right here that as I try to flatten him out on the base, this ankle, or at least this foot, is still kind of at an askew angle like this, and he's not completely flattened down on the surface. So it's almost like I'm pretty vindicated in saying that it's not even a top heaviness issue, it's an ankle issue. And I completely understand if that could be a make or break for an awful lot of McFarlane collectors, because you really want to be able to display this guy, especially if you're going to be throwing in some pretty decent accessories. Considering that this is Caveman Batman, he's not going to come with gadgets. He's not going to come with a batarang, or even though a stone batarang or some kind of bow and arrow, I think would have gone a long way. But instead you get these two blunt weapons. One of them just looks like your archetypal caveman kind of axe, even though there's still some little quality details that are very Batman-esque. And then you have this other double-sided axe. So you have one that's a little bit more elongated. I don't know what the official term of a weapon of this caliber would be, but this one is more axe-like, and it's a little bit on the bigger side. Both are pretty well sculpted and painted with the straps as well as the wooden handles, and then the much chiseled out rock formations forming the actual blades themselves. But if you take a closer look, you'll notice that yes, you have the bat symbols pretty much making up those pieces of the stone. You have pretty much the top half of the bat symbol forming on this elongated axe, and then the much more traditional looking axe is pretty much an entire bat symbol forming the axe blade portion of the entire weapon right here. And not only is it well painted, it's actually really well sculpted. Why? Because I've already hurt myself once with this thing. It's actually a little sharp here on the edges, as well as the pointed parts here at the top, that I actually have to put out an advisory out there that you have to be a little careful, because these things are actually pretty durable and pretty sharp. So they're pretty premium quality, a lot of plosives there, my apologies, but at least I can try my best to put him into his hands. There are going to be a little bit on the difficult side, but at least the fingers are flexible enough that putting them in there would be not that much of a problem, and hopefully I can use them to balance out the figure so that he's not as top heavy and a bit more weighted down, so that he's not going to be toppling as much as he was before. And it looks like I may have been right. Being able to hold the weapons, weigh it down, but at the same time dispersing the weight to the sides may have worked. He's actually standing a little bit better. I don't feel like he's going to topple at any second, but just in case, let me wrap up this review before that does indeed happen. And frankly, the tradition of having Batman figures that I wasn't expecting to own, let alone be very interested in, end up being one of the bigger surprises from McFarlane's catalog thus far. Yes, I am all on board for Caveman Batman here, even though this is again a Batman that I didn't think I would need, let alone be attracted to because of the way that he's much more primitive in nature. He's not going to have the cool gadgets, the cool suit. He still ended up making for a great McFarlane figure because the strengths that McFarlane has always been able to hone in on as far as sculpting, paintwork, the actual quality of plastic that's utilized for the body, as well as the actual little details of the figure as far as making sure that the cowl's right, making sure that the illusion of the pleather and the way that everything feels like it was actually constructed by a Neanderthal version of Batman actually takes place and feels pretty much alive. And making sure that that personality is not compromised, it actually works very well in favor of the figure. And that would have made him not only a genuine surprise, but frankly a near perfect addition to the collection if it wasn't for those ankle issues. Those are borderline a make or break deal for me, because I really do want to eventually display this guy up on the shelf with my complete Batman collection, and I don't want to be worrying about him toppling over the entire shelf if those feet are completely unreliable and I have to rely on the base for this amount of time. And because of that, I have to bring him down a notch and give Caveman Batman, or the Fight the Frozen Page Puncher Batman, a 8 out of 10. I still highly recommend him. Do not sleep on him, because this is definitely a worthwhile pickup for those of you that are going after a complete Batman collection. And even if you're not, I still think that you should look into this wave and not really pass it by because of how ridiculous it looks. Trust me, I'm still on board that it's definitely a very out there concept for a Batman wave, but it's generally those that end up surprising us the most. So I would say that if you are in the market, or at the very least intrigued in picking your own McFarlane Fight the Frozen Caveman Batman up, use the affiliate links in the description. They help with the channel in the process, and you guys can now get your own, because I believe he's now starting to ship. And beyond that is the comment section. If you do happen to own the Fight the Frozen Batman, let me know what you guys think about the figure. Do you like it, not like it? Do you think that this is a sleeper hit, or probably one that should be overlooked for much more favorable releases later in the year? And while we're on the subject of surprises, let me know what McFarlane Batman has surprised you the most. The one figure that you looked at and said, nah, I don't think I really need to get this, and once you got it, you went, never mind, I cannot go on without this figure being in my collection. Let me know your guys' entries in the comment section below. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. If you guys didn't, hit the thumbs down. Subscribe for more McFarlane reviews coming out here in the future. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you later.